Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks again for making the time to talk with us today on Monday, April 13th. Really grateful that you were able to make the time to be with us today. And I guess just to get us started here, first question would be, how has the work of the legislature been impacted so far by the coronavirus? I mean, obviously you're not meeting normally up in Montpelier, but I'm assuming you're still working through your committees, if remotely. Is that the case? And Linda Joy, why don't we start with you? Is that what's going on?
Sure, thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Pretty much we've been forced to work remotely. My committee has been meeting regularly, and we are going through bills that were on the table before. There are some issues that relate to COVID-19, but we're trying to address those slightly because the bills right now that we're going through do not really have a strong impact from the COVID-19. So we're looking, sensibly, I believe personally that we should be reserving as much funding as possible and holding it in reserve and not just dispersing it as though there was not a pandemic going on. But pretty much everybody's working through the bills, and we have no idea when they will be addressed, how they will be addressed. So we're waiting for further guidance on that. In addition, I have been just working through social media as much as I possibly can and telephonic calls with my constituents to make sure they're safe, checking in on them, and giving as much advice that I possibly can on social media to my constituents.
Okay, and Representative Browning?
Sure. I think that it's important for people to know that the only two things that the legislature has to do before adjourning are the budget and setting the education property tax rate. But both of those tasks have been completely thrown up in the air because the changes in state revenues and the greater demands on the budget due to the COVID-19 situation. So we are going to have to do the best we can with those tasks. We may have to finish the current fiscal year, which ends at the end of June, as best we can, and then do a temporary budget, like a 3-month budget, because it's very hard to forecast when we don't know what's happening to revenue. We don't know how the economy may restart again when the public health threat recedes. We don't know when that would be. So it's very hard for the legislature to do its usual work. So there's a little bit of waiting until things settle out before we can make those decisions. People are definitely working on other bills that might help. For instance, the Senate just passed a bill about no evictions during the crisis. But I think there's also tension because at the time that the legislature shut down, we were just at crossover when a huge amount of bills moved back and forth between the two chambers. And those bills represent a lot of work and a lot of possibilities of making things better for Vermonters. And I think it's going to be hard to decide how many of those bills might we still want to move, even as we're focused on the COVID-19 emergency.
And Senator Sears, what's been going on over in the Judiciary Committee in the Senate while things have been...
Well, these are uncharted waters. None of us have ever been through anything like this before in our lifetimes. And many of our constituents are, quite frankly, going through hell. And that is very real. I spent time this weekend with a woman whose husband is in the veterans home. She's worried sick about him, unable to get information. People are scared, and we should not be going about business as usual, and we're not. The work in Senate Judiciary Committee has focused on emergency legislation, like allowing for the release of certain offenders, but at the same time recognizing that we have some people who we need to be protected from. We've also worked on things like wills and making sure that people can adjust their wills remotely so that they can do that over a video rather than having to be in person with a lawyer and several other attorneys. We've done that with property deeds, with notary publics and all of those things that we're trying to help people to work through this crisis. I think I would agree with Cynthia that, our priority has to be the budget, and we're having a joint fiscal committee meeting that which I'm a member of, on Wednesday at noon, and we'll have a better sense of answering your question about how the CARES Act might impact Vermont and what might happen as a result of the changes. But we're $200 million down in revenues that we expected this quarter. So whether it be the education fund, the transportation fund, or the general fund, we're in trouble. The CARES Act will help some, but you can't use that for anything that was already budgeted. So, for example, we fought hard to make sure that people who work in places like for UCS and other group homes were getting paid, because the pay that many people will make on unemployment plus the $600 federal funds, those low-wage workers will actually be losing money who are actually working compared to people that are not working. So that was an unintended consequence that we've been working hard on, where your store clerks and so forth. So we're working on those issues as well, while we're looking at some of the other more dramatic things. I hear from constituents like both the representatives. We're trying to keep up with constituent work. We're meeting regularly by Zoom, but it really is not the same. And I found it difficult. We had our first session on Zoom with 30 members of the legislature, of the Senate. We were voting remotely, but I found out that even though I was reporting a bill, I wasn't on the Zoom because the Zoom could only handle 25 people. I don't know how the House is going to deal with 150. So those are the types of issues that need to get resolved. Hopefully, we'll move slowly. I think that I want to praise the governor. Overall, most of his efforts, I think, have been spot on. And that's part of the reason we haven't had some of the horror stories that we've seen in other states. But, 30 Vermonters, almost 30, I think it's 30 now, have died. This is, something like we've never seen. And we don't know what the impacts of those who have had a serious ailment from the coronavirus are going to be long-term to other organs of the body, even though they may have lived. We don't know what health-wise those subjects are going to, those folks are going to face. So, it's something like I said, we've never seen before. We're doing the best we can. A lot of my time has been spent on unemployment issues. People are really frustrated. We have about 75 people work for the Department of Labor who are on the unemployment issues, and they are swamped. It's overwhelmed. Nobody ever expected this kind of a surge. And we're trying to work through that with hiring outside consultants to try to help to lessen the impact and go through that. But people are frustrated, they're angry, and I understand that.
Sure, yeah, really difficult situation here. But so how will the state be divvying up the roughly $2 billion that we're going to be getting through the CARES Act? You were saying earlier that it can't be used to backfill revenue that was lost.
Well, but
I keep on hearing.
For example, one of the things that will be done is people that contract with the state, like with either DCF, Department of Mental Health, Department of Aging and Disabilities, we will be able to provide what I'll call hero pay. Some people are calling hazard pay. I know that in the PNMI programs, they're going to be providing $1.50 an hour, similar to what the state employees just negotiated. Those types of things are covered by the CARES Act because they weren't budgeted. So the state employees, for example, just negotiated for frontline workers who are working either in corrections or the mental health system. They will, among other things, they'll get $1.50 an hour increase because they're working, like hazard pay. I'd prefer to call it hero pay. The same will be true for many of the people who contract with the state. The Economic Development Committee in the Senate is working on how to get that kind of money out to people who work in grocery stores, those types of folks who are, really our frontline workers putting their health on the line. But they see somebody else, maybe their neighbor, is going to be getting their unemployment check from the state of Vermont plus $600 a week from the Fed. So trying to kind of even that unintended consequence out. Obviously, I don't disparage anybody from collecting unemployment. Hopefully they'll get it as quickly as possible, as well as the $600. We need that. They need that in order to make it through this troubling times.
Representatives Browning and Sullivan, did you want to chime in on that question?
Sure, I will. Oh, Cynthia, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think Senator Sears is right. There's going to be rules about how we can use the federal money. We can't just use the federal money to free up other funds, use the federal money to pay for things we would have done anyway. It's supposed to be related to the COVID-19 crisis. So I think we're going to have to see how that all shakes out. That's part of why we can't do the budget yet. I also think that this current crisis has pointed up, we're going to have to do something to help our hospitals and our healthcare providers. And we're also going to have to do something about telecommunications and broadband reception, because some of our children can't participate in the online learning because they don't have good enough reception. This has been a problem for a long time, and I know we won't be able to solve it now, but as we look past this current crisis, I hope we can finally take care of that issue, find the money and the will to take care of that issue in some way.
Me?
Your turn if you want it.
Sure. Well, I thank both the senator and the representative for what they've said, because they're spot on. I think the issues that I have been finding regarding this is, first, of course, I want to thank the governor, because he's focusing on saving lives, and that is the most important issue out there. But what I found is that people really don't understand the CARES Act. And so they really are having difficulty trying to find out what they are entitled to, because, and rightfully so, I mean, the CARES Act stems from an 88-page tax code. So if you don't go in and analyze it, it's going to be very difficult to understand the programs. And upon that implementation of the CARES Act, there are new resources that are available for small businesses. And that includes certain nonprofits, and it includes other employers, which will then stem down to employees and the people in Vermont. I mean, there are several areas of those programs. There's the Paycheck Protection Program, there's the Small Business Debt Relief Program, there's disaster loans, and some others. And I think that is what people need to understand as well, is how those programs work. There are areas in the relief programs which give loans to real estate areas that are not covered under other SBA loan areas. So that's what we really need to analyze as well. And I appreciate the fact that the administration is looking at that as well, so that we can then inform our constituents of how to apply. And the unemployment issue, as the senator said, is really horrific, because we have so many people who are applying. And the administration has also begun to contract with outside vendors to assist with that as well. And they put in a system where they're going to try to do it alphabetically. And of course, if people can't get through, which is the most frustrating of all, they will work with them to make sure that they get their unemployment.
I guess I was wondering, what have your thoughts been so far on, and I'm going to realize I'm getting a little ahead of the curve here maybe, but as we still seem like we're kind of a ways off from being on the other side of all of this, but as the grip that the crisis has on the state's economy begins to ease a little bit, hopefully in, well, a month or so, I guess the governor's stay-at-home order is in effect until May 15th. What do you see as some of the issues that the state's economy is going to be facing as we reemerge out of this? Are there some areas that you feel you really want to pay close attention to, or what's your sense of what we should be doing, let's say, hopefully by June or so, to kind of get the state economy moving again?
Well, if I might start, if it's okay.
Yep.
I don't think we're going back to normal until they have a vaccine to protect Vermonters and all people in the world from this virus. I think there will be starts, and we will get started up and try to plug this hole and that hole. I just feel this is a long-term process, and we need to stop kidding ourselves about it, that things will get back to where they were back in January. I think that there will be starts back up in the economy, but as one of the representatives mentioned about our hospitals, by not being allowed to do elective surgery and other things that hospitals rely on for their income, they're just short, and they're borrowing money from banks. They're laying off people in the middle of a health crisis. They're laying off staff. So they're going to need extraordinary help, and that'll need to come from the federal government. Hopefully the next act that comes will provide significant help for our hospitals. But I think that, you know, many of our small businesses are going to continue to rely on federal and state help in order to recover from this process. I don't think it's going to be an all-in type of thing where on June 15th or May 15th or whatever date you pick, the governor is going to lift the stay-at-home order and everything goes back the way it was. I think it'll take a lot longer than that for it to actually happen. And I think it's at that point in time that we need to be honest with our constituents about what's going to happen and how it's going to be dealt with. And that's why I agree with Cynthia about a 3-month budget. I suspect that that's what we will do. I don't know what happened. Many of the bills that we've been working on are extremely important to a lot of people. What happens to those bills, I don't know. But I think some of them will be dealt with. But I think others will fall by the wayside and have to be dealt with in 2021.
If I could chime in, I think that the senator is spot on with his comments. I think we're going to have to open the state economy up gradually, like starting with more construction work or people who work outdoors or people who, you know, are not interacting with a lot of other people. And we can't have large gatherings. We can't open up the restaurants and the hotels yet. We're going to have to take it step by step, because the last thing we want is to have an upsurge in cases again. This virus is so unpredictable. We don't know if people get immunity. We don't know if they can get it again. We just don't know where it is in our population. So I think we're going to need to take it slow and steady and be ready to pull back. We have a problem, and this is incredibly frustrating. This is unprecedented. We've never had something like this, but we need to do everything we can to get it right and to be cautious. And the federal government is stepping up and trying to provide resources. I'm not sure it's always in the best or most accountable way, but they are doing that. I think the state has to do that. The state may have to increase bonding to cover some of these issues, and then we'll have a plan for dealing with it later. I just think we need to do the best we can to support Vermonters through this, because the better we do that, the better shape we'll be in when we can finally come back to full functioning. But the availability of credit, loans, grant support is going to be key in terms of how well we're able to start up. But everybody is going to have to be patient, even in the midst of this frustration, because we just have to take it one step at a time.
Representative Sullivan?
Sure, thank you. In alignment with what the senator and representative have said, I really believe that the success of the pace of the recovery is going to depend crucially on the policies that we've undertaken during this phase of the crisis. If the policies actually ensure that the workers do not lose their jobs, renters and homeowners are not evicted, companies avoid bankruptcy, and businesses and trade networks are actually preserved, I believe that recovery will actually happen sooner and a bit more smoothly. There's going to be a major challenge for those who are low income and the emerging economies that actually face this capital fight. But we are going to require grants and financing from the global community as well. This is a different type of a downturn. This actual crisis is not being driven by demand now. Now it's an economical policy that stimulates an aggregate demand by what's going on. So I think we need to focus on resources for testing and treatment that must be boosted, which is what the administration is focusing on in this phase. I think that we have to focus on regular health care, as the senator said, the emergency treatment that's not being dealt with for surgeries. We need to focus on that. We have to focus on food production and distribution. We have to focus on the actual infrastructure of distribution so that we get it right now, so that we can minimize what's going forward in the economy once we come out of this phase. Because when we come out of this phase, there's going to be an excessive economic disruption. And I think that if we safeguard the web of relations now, we can actually do it in a more sensible economic development way. And if we can preserve employees and employers right now, it'll be an easier transition.
One question that sort of has come up recently in the last couple of days, at least it got my attention. I had the opportunity to talk with Secretary of State Jim Kondos about a couple of issues around, was Zoom meetings for select boards and local town government boards. And one of the questions we also talked about was voting and how voting will be impacted by the coronavirus. I mean, we have our primaries not until August, which seems like a long way off, but he pointed out to me that the ballots need to be printed by sometime in the middle of June in order to be available for folks to vote 45 days ahead of the primary, which gives them a very narrow window to get the ballots printed and distributed to the town clerks. Given the experience that we saw in Wisconsin at their state primary last week, I mean, what do you feel like the idea that maybe we should really amp up the mail-in means for folks to vote should be a priority, or should we just sort of go with what we have and kind of hope that by August, it's safe to go to the polls and nobody's going to be worried about, any kind of, about the virus at that point?
I think the legislation that we passed when we went back seems like a year ago, but it was actually 2 weeks ago, I think. We passed legislation that puts that decision in the hands of the Secretary of State and the governor to decide whether to have a ballot by mail or do it in the normal way. In most town elections, I found myself voting by mail anyway, because I'm never sure where I'm going to be on town meeting day or whenever they have special elections. I'm here, there, or everywhere. So I found it fairly simple. And there is funding available as part, I'm not sure it's part of the CARES Act, but I know there's funding available to help the states with voting. And I don't want to see us do what Wisconsin did. And that just is not a good example. So I will support, I know that they have to make the decision sooner rather than later, as you just pointed out, but it may be that the primary has to be held in that manner, and our town clerks and so forth are going to need a lot of help with that. On the other hand, they may feel that they can do it, but I know that they're going to have to make that decision rather soon, and I suspect it'll be by mail. In November, hopefully they'll be able to go back to the normal form of voting, which in Vermont, there's an awful lot of early voting anyway. We've been doing, I think 20% of the voting is early balloting. So I'm not sure that what impact that will have. I will say this, I voted early. I did it at the town clerk's office in the presidential primary, and both the candidates my wife and I voted for were gone by the time the primary was actually held. So.
Oh boy.
And we voted in the Democratic primary, just to make clear, so people can figure out.
I agree with Senator Sears. I think we should be ready to do the vote by mail for the primaries. Remember, the turnout in the primaries is not as big as in the general election. So and people in the primaries tend to be pretty motivated. So I'm sure we could do the primary that way if we have to. But as he says, we need to leave that to Secretary of State and the governor. I very much hope we're back to something closer to normal in November. But if we're not, we'll just have to make it work. Vermont has always done a lot to try to help people vote, and we'll just have to do that again.
All right. We're just about running out of time here. My little Zoom person reminds me of here. But just a last question, just to throw to you. Are there any lessons or takeaways from this whole experience that you think will carry forward? I mean, one obvious one seems that the state needs to boost its broadband capacity and certain, at least in certain parts of the state, Northeast Kingdom and Southern Vermont seem to come to mind. Beyond that, is there anything you're kind of thinking, once we're past all this, we will probably be doing more of, well, maybe not Senator Zoom meeting by Zoom as much as we're doing right now, but are there any things you see coming out of this that might be kind of longer term?
I can start on that. I think in addition to the broadband and the hospitals, I think we clearly have to revise paid leave policies to include the possibility of self-quarantine or caring for someone who's, the paid leave already has caring for someone who's ill, but we need to make sure that our paid family leave policies accommodate this kind of situation. I think the concept of business interruption insurance, including the possibility of a pandemic. My understanding is that the Wimbledon Tennis Club had pandemic insurance. So now that they've canceled the British Open, they're actually getting an insurance payment. So I never thought of this. I knew about business interruption insurance, for floods or fires. But I think we need to be thinking about that. And if there's a way that the state can make that available to businesses in the state, backstopping some kind of private insurance provision. And then I also think inequality, unequal access to healthcare and resources has really come to the fore. And I would also say levels of debt, because one of the things that's making things so hard for people now that their incomes are reduced, whether they're a small business owner, self-employed, or a worker, is if they have high levels of debt, they can't make their debt payment. So it's really easy to start increasing your debt when interest rates are low and the economic expansion goes on, but you really need to try to keep that under control, because we have just seen that you never know what is going to happen.
Representative Sullivan?
Oh, did you say me or did you say the senator? No, sorry. So I think it's really important that the governor and all of us look to what actually worked during this crisis. And we do an analysis of which programs worked and which ones were so far off the sidelines that we tried but were not effective, and then try to maintain those programs that did work and use them going forward and possibly expand upon them. I think that we always want to watch out for the small home businesses here because they provide flexible work, and we need to be careful not to have that dissipate. So I think that the one big takeaway for me was that Vermont band together as a community. I saw everybody from across the states reaching out to help each other. And what that tells me is that we will make it through this.
Senator Sears, we'll let you have the last word.
So before I can have the last word, that's another thing about Zoom, trying to figure out how to unmute and mute yourself. I think that I would only add to what has been said. We've seen the failure of our infrastructure to some extent in this, and our building capacity for broadband is one thing that was mentioned, but also the capacity where congregate housing takes place. It's been hard to isolate people. That's been true in nursing homes. 42% of the deaths in Massachusetts have been in nursing homes and long-term care facilities. We're going through that right now at one of our prisons where we're trying to find surge potential to isolate people. We've seen that in the nursing homes in Chittenden County. I think that's one lesson. I think there will be a time when this is over for all of us, but particularly on the federal level, where I think they've failed us miserably. But we need to go back and look at what can we have done differently, what could we do better, where were we lacking, and the other place in the infrastructure, we weren't, we're still using 20-year-old computer systems in our Department of Labor. That's one of the reasons it crashed, because we didn't put the money into updating that system. There's going to be a lot of surge, for example, in the hospitals. All of us who put off certain appointments are going to want our appointments. And we're going to want to get this or that taken care of that wasn't taken care of. There's going to be a surge in the courts. People have been putting off doing certain things in courts. How are they going to deal with that surge? So all of those things we need to examine for ourselves of how government responds to these types of problems. Just the way we did looking at Hurricane Irene and how we have to change what we do following Hurricane Irene. Those were lessons that we learned, and I think we're better prepared now for such a storm. We need to be better prepared for these types of events. Thanks
All right.
for putting this on, by the way, Andrew. Appreciate
What's
it
that?
very much.
Oh,
Thanks for
you're
putting
welcome.
this on.
And thank you all again for making the time. I'm sure you're all probably busier than ever with one thing or another. So anyway, well, thank you all again, Representatives Linda Joy Sullivan, Cynthia Browning, and State Senator Richard Sears. Great to have you with us today. Good luck going forward. And well, next time we meet, I hopefully it'll be in the more normal fashion around the table at the studio. Anyway, have a great day, everyone, and thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.